In the far northern reaches of the continent, where the mountains rose like black teeth against a silver sky, lay the ancient kingdom of Emberfall. Once a beacon of wisdom and strength, it now stood on the edge of uncertainty. Winters grew longer, harvests shorter, and beneath the cold wind carried rumors of a shift in power, of a quiet struggle unfolding behind stone walls and royal banners. The story begins not with a battle, nor with a crown, but with a young woman standing alone at the balcony of the citadel. Lady Elric Valewarden, ward to the royal family, watched the dawn rise over the sleeping city. She had lived in Emberfall since childhood, raised beside the king's sons as a sister in all but blood. Yet the tides of politics had never truly left her in peace. Wherever noble blood flowed, ambition followed. Ilara's fingers tightened around the railing as she spotted faint torches descending the mountain road. "The envoys from Riverhold have arrived early," she whispered to herself. Riverhold, Emberfall's old ally, and now, perhaps, its greatest uncertainty. For weeks, the king had spoken in hushed councils, his closest advisors bending over maps lit with trembling candlelight. Negotiations, treaties, trade routes, every word sounded harmless, yet carried the gravity of kingdoms. Ilara turned as soft footsteps approached. Prince Kalen, the king's second son, emerged from the archway behind her. His cloak was half-fastened, hair still unsettled from sleep. "You're awake early," he said, gently amused. "And you're late," Ilara replied with a faint smile. Kalen joined her at the railing. "Father will want us in the throne hall. The delegation brings news, and not all of it is good." Ilara nodded, though her thoughts wandered. For each prince she had grown up with, Kalen, steady and thoughtful, and Aldrich, the elder, proud heir to the throne, there were challenges rising around them like storm clouds. Factions in the court whispered of choosing sides, old noble houses rekindled dormant rivalries, and beyond the mountains, strange happenings were reported in lonely villages, sightings of pale lights at night, entire flocks of sheep gone missing, ancient runes carved into frost-covered stones, the kind of signs old chronicles warned about. Kalen's voice pulled her back. "Come, whatever awaits, we face it together, as we always have." Ilara followed him through the winding halls of the citadel, passing tapestries depicting Emberfall's long, turbulent history. They descended into the grand throne hall, where the king, Arendor the Steadfast, sat with quiet authority. His hair had turned silver over the winter, though his gaze remained sharp. Lord Aldrich, the eldest prince, stood beside him, posture rigid as carved marble. He acknowledged Ilara and Kalen with the slightest nod. The tension between the brothers was subtle, yet always present, like a blade hidden beneath velvet. The doors opened, and the Riverhold envoy stepped forward. A tall man in dark blue robes bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, we bring grave tidings. The southern borders are stirring. Several of our villages claim to have heard whispers in the night, not human, not animal, something ancient." A murmur swept through the court. The envoy continued, "And there is more. Someone or something has torn down the boundary markers between our lands. We fear a force older than our kingdoms may be waking." Ilara felt a chill ripple through her, not from fear alone, but from recognition, for only she knew what she had found 3 nights earlier, hidden beneath frost and moonlight beyond the citadel walls. A stone etched with the same ancient runes described now, glowing faintly with embers that refused to die. She had told no one, not yet. And as the king ordered the envoys escorted to their chambers, Ilara realized the truth she'd been avoiding. Whatever had awakened in the valley, whatever called from the forgotten past, it was already here. The storm passed slowly over Hollow Vale. leaving the castle wrapped in gray morning light. The banners on the battlements hung wet and heavy, like tired soldiers waiting for orders that never came. Beneath them, the kingdom's heartbeat pulsed through the stones. Whispers, footsteps, secrets. In the throne room, King Aldric sat alone. His crown, heavy with ancestral iron, rested on the table beside him rather than on his head. He traced the carved sigils along its edges, symbols of rulers long dead. His eyes drifted toward the windows, watching the fog creep across the courtyard. For the first time in many years, the king looked uncertain. The council gathered at sunrise, nobles in layered furs, scholars clutching scrolls, military captains with stern, sleepless faces. Each one entered with a different belief about what should be done, and a different fear of what would happen if they were wrong. Aldric listened to their voices blend into a storm. We must strengthen our borders. The prophecy speaks of a rival king rising beyond the northern ridge. The people grow restless, whispers of rebellion spread. And then, more quietly, "Your daughter has visions again, Your Majesty." The room fell silent. Princess Ilara, the heart of the prophecy. Aldric dismissed the council with weary courtesy. Decisions demanded clarity, not chaos. Ilara waited in the old library, the room where her mother used to read her ancient songs and fables. The candlelight flickered against her silver-golden hair as she leaned over an open tome, tracing a familiar symbol, a burning circle crossed by a serpent. When her father entered, she closed the book gently. "Ilara," he said softly, "you reached for that symbol in your sleep. The maids heard you whispering its name." She hesitated, eyes distant. "I saw him again," she murmured, "the king of shadows, the one the seers warned about." Aldric stepped closer. "Ilara, visions are not destiny." "But they warn of it," she replied, "and I fear the kingdom is drifting towards something it cannot escape." Aldric placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, but trembling. "You are my daughter, not a weapon of prophecy." She lowered her gaze, knowing her father believed the words, but fearing the truth beneath them. Far beyond the borders of Hollow Vale, in the frost-covered mountains, a young man rode alone. Prince Rowan of Thornreach, the last heir of a fallen kingdom, betrayed, exiled, and hunted by those who feared what his bloodline represented. His cloak was torn, his boots worn thin, yet his posture remained noble. He carried no banner, yet the wind seemed to follow him with respect. Rowan had heard the rumors. A kingdom to the south was stirring with prophecy. A princess of light, a king under threat, and a shadow rising. He rode toward Hollow Vale, not for conquest, but for answers. 3 nights later, Rowan reached the edges of the vale. Fog wrapped the land like a living spirit, but torchlight glowed from a small stone bridge crossing the river. As Rowan approached, he saw someone standing there, a young woman cloaked in forest green, her breath forming mist. Ilara. She had left the castle walls in search of clarity and walked directly into destiny. Their eyes met, strangers by circumstance, connected by something far older. Ilara spoke first, her voice cautious. "You do not belong to these lands." Rowan bowed his head slightly. "And you walk them as though they do not belong to you." Her lips curved with the faintest hint of surprise. "Who are you, traveler?" "Someone who has lost everything and seeks only truth." She hesitated before answering.
then perhaps we walk the same path." For a moment, the world held its breath. Unseen, on the riverbank below, a figure cloaked in darkness knelt among the reeds, eyes like dying embers fixed on the two young nobles. A whisper slithered from its lips, soft, cold, patient. "The prophecy unfolds." The creature vanished into the mist, leaving a ripple in the air where shadows unnaturally refused to follow.
Dawn broke over High Reach Castle with a pale, reluctant light, as if the sun itself hesitated to shine upon a kingdom standing on the edge of fracture. Servants whispered through cold hallways. Courtiers moved like shadows, trading news, fears, and predictions with quiet urgency. And everywhere, people repeated the same phrase: "The king is dying." Princess Elric Valewarden stood at the balcony of her chambers, overlooking the mist-wrapped valley. She looked composed, regal even, but the tight set of her jaw betrayed the storm inside her. Her father's illness had come suddenly, suspiciously suddenly. Behind her, a gentle voice said, "You haven't slept." Elwyn turned. Sir Calden Thorne, captain of the Silver Guard and her closest friend since childhood, stepped forward. His armor was polished, but his expression carried exhaustion. "I can rest when the realm is safe," she replied, quietly. Calden hesitated before speaking the words weighing on him. "Your uncle Varos gathers supporters. If the king passes before you are named heir—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Elwyn's eyes turned toward the North Tower, where her uncle's banner fluttered, a reminder of ambition sharpening its teeth. "I won't let the crown fall into hands that would suffocate this kingdom," she said. "And you won't face this alone," Calden answered. The castle courtyard suddenly filled with commotion as a royal falcon descended, landing on the outstretched glove of a waiting handler. A scroll was tied to its leg, sealed not with the king's crest, but with the sigil of the Eastern Dominion. Elwyn arrived first. Courtiers gathered behind her as the seal cracked open. The message inside was short, but heavy. "To Princess Elwyn, a threat grows in your court. Trust only the loyal. We march at dawn." Calden read it twice, jaw tightening. The Eastern Dominion marching here? To help? Or to claim? Elwyn folded the parchment. In this realm, offers of help often hide teeth. That night, Elwyn attended the council chamber, a grand circular hall with banners from every province hanging overhead. Around the table sat lords and advisors, and her uncle, Varos. Varos smiled as she entered. It was the kind of smile one wore before making a move on a board already rigged. "Niece," he greeted smoothly, "our kingdom trembles. We must act swiftly. I propose a regent, one capable of handling affairs until your father recovers." "Or until he doesn't," whispered a lord beside Calden. Elwyn kept her voice steady. "There can be no regent while the king yet lives." Varos leaned forward. "And if he draws his final breath tonight, the crown cannot remain empty." Calden's hand instinctively touched the hilt of his sword. Elwyn met Varos's gaze. "If the king dies," she said, "the rightful heir will take the throne." "And who," Varos asked softly, "decides who that is?" The question rippled through the chamber like a chilling wind. Later, after the council dispersed, a hooded figure intercepted Elwyn and Calden in the corridor. "Princess," the figure said urgently, "I bring news of grave importance." Calden stepped between them, but the figure raised both hands. "I serve the crown." They handed Elwyn a sealed note. She opened it quickly. Inside were only 4 words. "Tonight, the tower
poison. Elowin's breath stopped. The king's tower. Calden looked at her, understanding immediately. Your father is in danger. No, she whispered. He already was. This decides everything. With one look, they ran, footsteps echoing through the stone halls. Torches blurred into streaks of gold as they ascended the narrow stairway of the king's tower. Every second felt stolen. Elowin's heart thundered as old memories flashed, her father laughing as she chased fireflies, whispering stories, teaching her the duties of a ruler. She couldn't lose him. Not tonight, not by someone's hand. At the top of the stairs, the door to her father's chamber was slightly ajar. Calden moved first, pushing the door open with controlled force. Inside, the king lay weak but breathing. A robed figure stood beside him, reaching towards the chalice at his bedside. "Stop," Calden commanded. The figure froze. Elowin rushed in, eyes blazing. "Turn around." Slowly, the figure lowered their hood, and beneath it was a face Elowin knew, someone who should never have been in this room. But the truth didn't break her, it hardened her. "Why?" she whispered. The figure trembled. "Because the wrong heir must not rise. The realm must be corrected." Calden stepped forward. Elowin lifted her hand. "No, I want to hear the truth from their own mouth." Minutes later, the would-be poisoner was taken into custody. The king's physician examined the chalice. The liquid inside carried a faint shimmer. A sleeping draught mixed with something far deadlier. Elowin sat beside her father, taking his frail hand. He stirred, eyes opening for a moment. "My daughter," he whispered. "I'm here," she whispered back, steady but trembling. His voice was only a breath. "You must protect the crown." And then he slipped into sleep again. But now Elowin knew the truth. The crown was no longer merely at risk, it was being hunted. And those who hunted it were closer than she had ever imagined.
The rain began at dusk. It fell gently at first, tapping against stone and steel, washing the dust from the battlements of High Reach Keep. By nightfall, it became relentless, a curtain of water blurring torches into trembling stars. Inside the keep, King Aldric stood alone in the map hall. The long oak table before him was carved with rivers, borders, and old battle scars. Small metal markers, wolves, crowns, towers, stood frozen where generals had last argued over them. Aldric did not move them. He stared instead at the banner hanging above the hearth, the silver crown on black cloth, the symbol of his line. Once it had meant unity. Now it felt like a challenge. The messenger had arrived soaked and shaking hours before sunset. The seal on the letter was broken. Aldric read the words again in the firelight. "The Eastern Lords no longer recognize your claim. They gather under a different banner, a crown of ash." Aldric closed his eyes. So it had begun. Not rebellion, not war. Something worse. Division. Across the keep, Lady Morella stood at her chamber window, watching the rain. The city below glimmered faintly, roofs slick with water, streets glowing amber beneath lanterns. Somewhere, a bell rang the hour. She pressed a hand against the cold glass. In her other hand, a folded note delivered in secret. It bore no seal, no name, only a message written in careful, familiar script. "Meet me where the river bends, before dawn. We must speak, before loyalty becomes regret." Morella knew the handwriting. Her breath caught. Rowan. Rowan had been her shield once. They had grown up together in these halls, learning courtly dances and blade forms in the same courtyards. When Morella was sent to study diplomacy, Rowan had sworn to protect her return. Now he served the crown guard. And yet, she folded the note slowly. In the court, whispers had grown louder, of guards bribed, of gates left unlatched, of old friendships tested by new promises. Morella did not believe Rowan a traitor, but belief, she had learned, was a luxury kings could not afford. The council gathered late. Rain echoed through the high windows as Lord Varen, Lady Selene, and 3 lesser nobles took their seats around the table. King Elric stood at its head, unmoving. The eastern lords gather troops, no banners yet, but swords are being sharpened. Selene's eyes flicked to Elric. And the rumors of a second heir. Silence fell. Elric spoke quietly. There is no second heir. But someone wants them to believe there is, Selene replied. Varen leaned forward. Then we must strike first, arrest suspected sympathizers, close the gates, show strength. Aldric's jaw tightened. And lose the loyalty of half the realm by morning? No one answered. When the council dispersed, Elric remained. He reached up and removed the crown from his head, setting it on the table. Its silver gleamed softly in the firelight. He remembered his father's words. A crown is not worn for power, but for endurance. Elric exhaled slowly. Endurance, or sacrifice. Before dawn, Morella left the keep disguised in a traveler's cloak. The rain had eased to mist. The river curved quietly beyond the city walls, dark and smooth, reflecting the paling sky. Rowan waited there, hood drawn low. You came, he said softly. I had to, Morella replied. They stood apart, close enough to recognize one another, far enough to remain cautious. They're using your name, Rowan said. Ash Crown, a false lineage, but people are listening. Who? Morella asked. Rowan hesitated. Men who once swore loyalty to your father. The words hurt more than she expected. Why tell me this? She asked. Rowan met her eyes. Because soon I will be ordered to choose, and when that happens, I need to know where you stand. Morella said nothing. The mist thickened around them. At last she spoke. I stand with the realm, even if it breaks my heart. Rowan nodded slowly. Then prepare yourself, he said, because hearts will break before crowns fall. He stepped back into the fog. Morella remained by the river long after he vanished, listening to the water flow, steady, indifferent, eternal. The council chamber of Aurelian Keep was built to impress and to intimidate. Tall pillars of white stone rose like frozen giants, holding aloft a domed ceiling painted with fading constellations. Sunlight streamed through high windows, cutting the air into bands of gold and shadow. Elric Valewarden stood at the center of the chamber, feeling every eye upon him. Lords of the realm had gathered at last. They arrived with banners, entourages, in quiet calculations. Some came out of loyalty, others came to measure weakness. All of them came with something to gain or to lose. At the far end of the hall sat Queen Merith, her posture upright, her face composed, though the silver crown upon her head seemed heavier than ever. To her right stood Sir Aldrich Thorne, motionless as stone. To her left, Lady Ysara, hands folded, gaze unreadable. The murmuring died as Elric stepped forward. He spoke carefully. He told them of the failing border wards, of villages gone silent without sign of war, of whispers carried on the wind, old magic stirring where it should not. He did not speak of the Vale, not yet. The lords listened, some with interest, others with polite skepticism. Lord Halvarin of the Low March leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming. If the borders are thinning, then reinforce them. That is what soldiers are for. A murmur of agreement followed. Elric met his gaze. Steel cannot stop what walks unseen. That silenced the room. Lady Morwen of the Riverlands narrowed her eyes. You speak in riddles, Valewarden. Are you claiming sorcery? I am claiming history, Elric replied calmly, and history has teeth. The queen raised her hand. Silence returned. Each of you knows, Marith said, that this kingdom was not forged by sword alone. Long ago, pacts were made, pacts we barely remember, yet still rely upon. Her gaze swept the chamber. The world beyond our borders is changing, whether we choose to see it or not. Some shifted uneasily, others smiled, thin and sharp. When the council adjourned, nothing had been decided, which Elric realized was itself a decision. That evening, rain fell softly over the keep. Elric stood beneath a stone archway overlooking the inner gardens when footsteps approached. Lady Ysara joined him without announcement. The council fears you, she said quietly. They fear what they cannot control, Elric answered. Ysara studied the rain. Not all of them oppose you. Some simply wait to see which way the wind turns. And you? He asked. She smiled faintly. I was born into waiting. There was something unspoken between them, a shared understanding that alliances were rarely formed by trust alone. Later that night, Elric found Sir Aldrich sharpening his sword by lamplight. You stood silent today, Elric said. Aldrich did not look up. My place is not in words. But, Aldrich paused, there are men at court who would welcome chaos. A realm afraid is easier to rule. Elric nodded. I know. Aldrich met his gaze. If the shadows you fear are real, then someone here already serves them. The thought settled like frost. Far beyond Aurelian Keep, in lands no banner claimed, something ancient shifted. A presence stirred beneath stone and root, listening to distant echoes of names spoken aloud. It felt the pull of old bonds weakening. It felt the veil thinning, and it waited, patiently. Night deepened its hold on Aurelian Keep. Torches flickered along the corridors, their light bending across stone walls etched with the names of forgotten victories. Somewhere far below, water moved through ancient channels, whispering secrets older than the crown itself. Elric Valewarden did not sleep. He stood within the archive vaults, a place few were permitted to enter. Dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only by the slow movement of his hands as he turned fragile pages bound in cracked leather. Records of pacts, of borders not drawn on maps, of promises made to things that no longer walked openly in the world. Or so the scribes claimed. A symbol repeated itself across the texts, 3 interwoven circles, broken at one point, as though something had slipped through. Elric traced it with his finger. The veil, he murmured. Footsteps echoed softly behind him. Lady Ysara emerged from between the shelves, her presence calm, deliberate. You look like a man searching for an answer he fears. Or confirmation, Elric replied. She approached, eyes scanning the open tome. The old families kept copies of these records. Most were edited, destroyed by design. Ysara inclined her head. Some truths are considered dangerous, only to those who benefit from silence. A pause stretched between them. You should be careful, she said at last. There are ears even here. Elric closed the book. I know. That is why I needed someone who understands quiet loyalty. Her gaze sharpened. And if loyalty and survival no longer align, then the realm will fracture, slowly, invisibly. Elsewhere in the keep, Sir Aldrich walked the outer ramparts. Below, the city slept, unaware, unguarded in its ignorance. A figure stood near the watchtower, cloaked, waiting. "You took your time," Aldrich said, without turning. The figure's voice was smooth. "Caution is a form of respect. You serve someone. I want to know who." A faint smile. "We serve the balance, or what remains of it." Aldrich's hand tightened on his sword. "The balance you protect is bleeding." "Then perhaps," the figure replied, stepping back into shadow, "it must be allowed to." The wind carried the last of his words away. Far beneath the earth, the ancient presence shifted again, not awakening, not yet, but listening more closely than before. Queen Mayoreth sat alone in the solar, dawn light brushing her features in pale gold. Before her lay a single letter, no seal, no signature, only a warning written in careful ink. The veil cannot be mended by force, only by remembrance. She folded the letter slowly. Her reign had been shaped by restraint, by choosing peace where war might have brought quicker answers. Yet now she felt the weight of centuries pressing upon her shoulders. The crown was older than her bloodline, older than the kingdom itself. She summoned Elric before the court convened. When he arrived, she dismissed the attendants. "Tell me the truth," she said, "not as my advisor, not as a keeper of secrets. As a man who still believes this realm can be saved," Elric replied. Her gaze held his. "Then speak." "The veil was never meant to last forever," he said. "It was sustained by unity between crown, land, and those who dwelt beyond sight. That unity is failing." "And the cost?" she asked. Elric hesitated. "Trust, sacrifice, perhaps the end of old crowns." Silence followed. When Mayoreth finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Then we will not cling to the past simply because it is familiar." She stood. "Prepare the realm quietly." Outside, the bells rang for morning prayer. The city stirred. Merchants opened their stalls. Children laughed in the streets. None of them knew how close the world stood to change. And somewhere beyond borders and banners, the ancient presence felt something new. Not hunger, not anger, expectation. Dawn came without warmth. A pale sun rose over Aurelian Keep, its light thin and distant, as if the sky itself were uncertain it should remain. Elric felt it the moment he woke. The air was wrong. Not colder, emptier. He stood at the window of his chamber, looking toward the eastern hills where the ancient border stones once glowed faintly at night. They had gone dark. The veil was failing. The summons came swiftly. Queen Mayoreth had called a private council, not of lords, but of those she trusted when crowns and banners were stripped away. Elric, Lady Ysara, Sir Aldrich, and one other. Arch-scholar Thalen, bent with age, his hands trembling as he carried a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. They met in the lowest chamber of the keep, a place carved long before Aurelian had a name. Old stone, old silence. Thalen unwrapped the cloth. Inside lay a circlet of dull silver, etched with symbols worn nearly smooth. "The crown of binding," Thalen said, "or what remains of it." Mayoreth inhaled slowly. "It was destroyed." "So the histories claimed, but truths have a habit of surviving in pieces." Elric felt the weight of the moment settle upon him. "The veil was never self-sustaining," he said quietly. "It was held." Thalen nodded. "By will, by sacrifice." No one spoke. Finally, Mayoreth broke the silence.
Tell me what it will cost." Phelan hesitated. "Not land, not gold, not blood." He looked at Elric. "It will cost memory. The one who binds the veil will fade from the world's knowing, not dead, but forgotten." Ysara's breath caught. Aldric's hand tightened on his sword. Elric did not look surprised. "I wondered when you would say it," he said. They stood upon the eastern hill by nightfall. The border stones had been cleared of snow by unseen heat, their ancient runes faintly stirring as Elric approached. The wind howled, not with fury, but with longing. Mareth placed the circlet into Elric's hands. "You have served this realm longer than any living soul. I will not command this of you." Elric met her gaze. "You already have, by trusting me." He turned to Ysara. For a moment, words almost came. Instead, she stepped forward and pressed a small token into his palm, a ring of plain iron. "So that someone remembers," she said softly. He smiled. Then Elric stepped between the stones. The world slowed. Light folded inward, sound stretched thin. Elric raised the circlet and felt the veil answer, not as a force, but as a presence, old, weary, waiting. He placed the crown upon his brow. The magic did not burn. It unwound. Memories lifted from him like birds from water. His name, his victories, his failures, even the shape of his face, offered willingly to hold the boundary between worlds. The ancient presence beyond the veil recoiled, not in rage, in recognition. The stones flared, the wind fell silent, and the veil held. Morning returned. The hills were quiet. The stones stood warm and whole. Aurelian Keep slept peacefully. Queen Mareth woke with a strange sense of loss she could not name. Lady Ysara stood at her window, turning an iron ring in her fingers, unable to recall why tears fell. Sir Aldrich walked the walls at dawn, pausing where someone should have been beside him, but could not remember who. Beyond the hills, where the world bends toward old magic, a lone figure walked the forest paths, uncrowned, unremembered, at peace. The veil stood firm behind him, and though no songs would ever speak his name, the realm endured. Some nights, when the wind is just right, travelers near the eastern hills swear they feel a presence, not watching, not threatening, but guarding. A warmth where there should be none, as if the world itself is being held together by a promise it no longer remembers making.